Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Awaken to Your Soul Path. I am your host, Barbara, and today I am joined by the wonderful Robyn Vogel. And today we are going to talk about healing your heart. I've been looking forward to this topic because I think it's such an important topic. A lot of people are either being asked to open their heart, and if that's not possible yet, to heal their hearts, because we are shifting massively in energy. And I think a lot of people need some guidance in this. So I'm very happy that you're here to talk about this today, Robyn. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. Been looking forward to it as well.
So
Yeah.
we talked about it a little bit before, right? Because um, when you are an empath or when you are an energetic being, sooner or later, there will be a moment in your life where you hit a wall, where you feel like, is this all there is to my life? I don't find any fulfillment in this when you're still working a 9 to 5 job, or where you feel like, is this really all there is? There has to be something more, right? Because
I
if
think that
this is,
happened to me so long ago. Yes. It's really interesting that you say that because when you first started saying it, I was like, did that happen to me? And then I realized that that actually happened when I was about 25 years old. So more than 25 years ago.
Mhm.
I was working and in what one might call a corporate environment-ish.
Yeah.
Corporate enough. And
Yeah.
after about 1 year in that environment, I was like, there has to be more than this.
Mhm.
So I didn't last very long before that feeling came over me. I don't think I recognized myself as an empath at the time. And I
Mhm.
had a lot of healing to do myself. And I think actually, now that I think about it, leaving that job and going out on my own, which in those days, most people thought I was absolutely out of my mind.
Oh yeah.
Um, not to have a consistent like salary and place to go every day. But it was really the moment where I actually started my own healing journey. Like I needed the
Mhm.
space for it, I think, the energetic space, the psychic
Yeah.
space. I didn't
I
recognize myself as an empath at the time, but
I
all the things.
recognize that completely. I discovered by accident that I am an HSP. It didn't mean anything to me. Empath also didn't mean anything to me. But I remember vividly when I ended up in my burnout and everything came crashing down, that my boss told me, "Oh yeah, but you are an HSP because my wife is an HSP and you're exactly the same." And I didn't even know if I had to be offended because I had no clue what he was talking about. And
Right.
that's how I started looking into these terms and learned what a highly sensitive person, because that's an HSP is, and what
Yes.
an empath is. And that was indeed also the start of my healing journey, because it's the start of discovering who I really am. And with that discovery came the realization that I had been living a life that was not meant to be my life, and that also didn't fit who I really am. But I had no clue who I really was.
Yeah, same. Same. I was living a life that was prescriptive in the culture, you
Hmm.
know, got a job, I looked for a husband, although I definitely had parts that were like, I'm not looking for a husband when everybody else was. But lo
Hmm.
and behold, I still, at that time did meet somebody and got married. And um, yeah, it was about 10 years or a little more. It was probably 10 years, and then it took some more years. But to realize that, I was living somebody else's life really. And
Yes,
although there were many beautiful things about it for sure, including my children, and the relationship, but that
exactly.
I needed, being an HSP and not knowing it at the time was such a struggle. And
Mm.
there kept being like sort of conflicts in what I needed and what kind of the world, including the family, were doing. And I
Yes.
kept pulling myself, like separating out and trying to deal with the things that were going on inside myself that I couldn't even quite identify, except it felt like kind of overwhelm and it felt like grief and it felt like anxiety.
Hmm.
But I had no idea why all those things were happening. And I kept separating myself out. And then people were looking at me like, why is she, you know, why is she like that kind
Yes.
of thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. There are two very important things that you mentioned here. The one thing is that everybody's journey is very different. You figured out that the corporate world was not for you very quickly, but then ended up discovering all of these things in your relationship, in your marriage, and with the children, and the end of it. For me, it took very long to discover that the corporate world was not mine, and I encountered all of these things while ending up in a burnout from my job, while I never got married and ended up in a relationship. So everybody's journey is different, but in the end, it can manifest very similarly with similar types of feelings, because there's a lot going on there, because it's also what you mentioned, social expectations and social pressure, right? The
Yes.
ideal dream, or the American dream, or the ideal world, is where you have a good education, you find a good job that pays good money, then you find a spouse, in our case a husband, but in a man's case a wife, and then you're supposed to have 2.5 children and a white picket fence and maybe a dog and a cat, and then you work that job until you retire something. And that's in general always shared as the ideal.
Yeah, sure is. It sure is. Yeah. And until we become more awake and start to do our healing work, or more awake, meaning more aware, more
Mhm.
conscious of what's happening, most people, myself included, just kind of went with that program,
Yes.
even though there was like all this sort of dissonance and kind of rub against it. And again, at the time, for me, not knowing why that was happening.
For
And I
me
mean, even
neither.
in this conversation, to be honest, I'm gaining more insight into what was happening when I was in my 20s, which is not something I think about very much.
That was
Um,
beautiful.
yeah, so thank you for this conversation. And
Thank you.
yeah, and then you mentioned burnout, and that is what happened to me in my really in my early 30s, and then kind of big time in my early 40s. Um, just like
Mhm.
flatline
Yes,
burnout. And
exactly.
yeah.
And that is what's happening, right? Because we do what we think we have to do, what is
Mm,
expected of us, what everybody else seems to be doing. So we do more or less the same thing, and we don't recognize what is happening because nobody has told us that it can be different. Nobody has shown us that it can be different. So we have no other knowledge. We have no other examples. So
mm,
we follow the example that we are seeing. And then a lot of us have a major disconnect from our bodies, from ourselves. And so the body tends to give signals that tells us that we are on the wrong path, like increasing headaches, maybe more migraines, maybe gastrointestinal problems, maybe trouble sleeping, or always tight neck and shoulders,
mhm,
those types of things. And we don't recognize it as a warning signal that we should take a moment and really look at what we're doing, and then ask ourselves, does this fit me?
mhm.
Nobody teaches us to question things that everybody says are normal or the norm.
It's true. Nobody teaches us to stay connected with our bodies.
No.
Think about, I don't know how it was where you grew up, but where I grew up, gym class was like it was like torture. And it wasn't about connecting with your body. It was really horrible. And so we move through life, the way I'm understanding it now is like we move through life, most of us, without including our bodies in the journey. And
Yes,
I
there's
feel,
a
yeah, that
disconnect between head and body. Yes.
I was sort of dragging my body with me through life,
Hmm.
and ended up with a lot of burnout and some pretty very,
Yeah.
very significant, for me, very significant fatigue that lasted um, a very long time. I
And that's
recently did a good piece of
eventually what
advice.
happens, right? Because our
Yeah.
minds are incredibly strong, and
Hmm.
we just keep going and we keep
Yeah.
going and we keep going and we keep pushing ourselves and we keep going. And that's what the mind does. And the body says, no, no, stop, pain here, pain there, problems here, problems there,
Right.
slow down. This is too much. We don't like this. It's
Yes.
basically screaming at us, and we have no idea. We just take an aspirin or
Mhm.
get a massage or ignore it completely. Yeah, so
Yes.
many of us are stars at ignoring
Yes.
many of these discomforts, and fighting a way around it, or taking more pills for it instead of just looking at why is this happening. And that's because nobody tells us that these are signals to take seriously, and that it's our body trying to tell our mind, you are taking us on a journey that's harmful for us, please
You don't
stop.
want. Hmm. It's really true. There was so much for me anxiety when you're speaking. You're reminding me of it being in my 20s and having some panic attacks and when I was in college, and then feeling a lot of anxiety in my 20s. And I remember saying it to somebody, a family member, and they were like, "Oh, you should probably get that checked out or something." And I was like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, it really is. The word dissonance just keeps coming to mind for me. It's like this
yeah,
dissonance, like
and
these two
disconnect.
things that are not, yeah, disconnect, that are
Yes,
not really going in the same way. And
exactly.
so, yeah, you can end up with all kinds of long-term or chronic or
Well,
acute
that's eventually what
symptoms.
happens,
Um,
right? Because the body
yeah,
keeps, giving bigger symptoms and bigger signals because we're not doing anything with the other ones. Either we
right.
don't recognize them or we are ignoring them. And eventually, and that's what happened with me with the burnout. I was wanting to go and go and go and go, and my body said, no, this is as far as we are going. And it went into complete shutdown. And I remember that when I ended up in my burnout, I think the first 48 hours, I couldn't stop crying. They took me to the doctor to give me pills because I couldn't
Mhm.
sleep and I couldn't stop crying, literally nonstop crying. And then they gave me pills that stopped the crying. And then came the sleeping for
Mhm.
18 hours straight. And if I then woke up and got myself showered and dressed, I wanted to go back to bed again. That's how
Right.
far I had pushed myself past my limits because my mind wanted to keep going. And that's where the body then, I didn't leave my body any other choice than to just completely shut down. And that's
Yeah.
what's happening with a lot of people, because there's on the one hand this disconnect, and on the other hand there are these expectations. And what I realized when I looked around is that everybody seemed to work to pay the bills and nobody was really happy in their job, and this seemed to be socially accepted and the way everybody was experiencing life. So then
Yeah.
when you look around, you think, well, I need to settle for this, or I need to accept this in some
Mhm.
way. But that is not possible because our heart knows we are meant for something better.
Right. Yeah, and I'm going to bridge this for a minute to talking about heal your heart or just healing, because for me, and this is just another layer of what we've been talking about, this way that the mind keeps us so busy and distracted, and like you said, separate from ourselves, is also a way to quote unquote protect ourselves from the healing that can be painful,
Yes.
that our beings need to do. And so we all have these protective parts inside ourselves. I come from a psychotherapy background. And these protective parts are, they do their jobs really well. So they're great at distraction, like anything that keeps us separate from, something that might feel painful or scary or really hard to work through. And then those protective parts are working overtime, which is basically what we've been talking about, right? Keeping
Mm,
us busy and distracted from our body and separate and disconnected from, what's actually happening deep inside us. So
mm.
that distraction, yeah, it can lead obviously to burnout, to all the kinds of
Yes.
symptoms we're talking about, and prevent us from actually doing the internal work that we need to do
You're
in order
absolutely
to,
right.
move
And
forward
it's
in our lives.
indeed because we probably are not ready for it yet. A lot of things that
Maybe.
happened
Yeah.
to me happened when I was very young, and I
Mm,
wasn't even capable of processing it or
right.
even handling it. So what happened as a protective mechanism for me was that I sort of distanced myself from the very soft, emotional feeling part of my body. I shut that part off and put it somewhere dark and survived on my logic and my reasoning for a long time in order to get through my childhood, to get through my 20s, even to get through my 30s. But the burnout happened in the beginning of my 30s, and that forced me to feel everything. I truly believe that that is why I couldn't stop crying, because it felt
Yeah.
like I was drowning in everything, and where before I was able to sort of keep everything locked I would say we have a sort of a cupboard in our head, and with all these doors and drawers and such, and we put everything in and we lock it and we keep it tight and locked and way, right? But eventually it needs to come out.
Yes.
Eventually it needs to see the light, it needs to be healed, and it needs to be dispersed so that we can emerge as our true self, to
Yeah.
step into the life that we are meant to be living. And to get us to that point where we are ready for all of that, we devise a myriad of survival techniques that were fabulous when we created them. They helped
Yes.
us survive trauma or other things that happened, and that took us through our 20s and 30s, and worked really well at some point, but eventually they sort of turn against us.
Yeah. We always say like what was very effective and useful, like you said, when we were children, are the exact things as adults that become the obstacles,
Exactly.
actually. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Because now
And
the
then you can think about limiting beliefs or things like that, but also I call them faulty autopilot programs.
Mhm.
I
Yes.
learned to make myself small and invisible as a very young child
Mm,
already, because if my father didn't see me, then he couldn't hurt me. So that was a protection mechanism for me. But when I was working as a project manager, when I was still in my corporate job, and I had a client that was also big and rah, 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 then I also did this because that's what I was used to with men that behaved that way. But in my
yeah.
role as a project manager, that was not serving me.
Right. Yeah, it's really true. And the people that I work in my business come back to love. Most people have been through some kind of childhood trauma or, some kind of very significant challenge, and they're finding themselves kind of either either not in relationship or in and out of relationships, sort of repeating patterns that aren't really working for them. And then at this point, maybe in their 50s or 60s or even sometimes 70s, they are like so frustrated and ready to actually get down and do the work, like really figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's most often, and can I say 100% no, but it's pretty close to 100% that it's, these protections that,
Mhm.
like you said, defense mechanisms that we so needed. Thank God, we had them, because we might not have survived the things that we experienced in our lives. But now they're like overworking, like you said, kind of on autopilot, or they are on autopilot, and
Mhm.
stuck because they're just stuck in the thing that they know how to do best. And
Yes.
the work
And
has been to do the healing. Heal your heart is, what I call it and what I call my program. um, but basically to do that healing work so that I always tell people, like, do your healing work, love learn to love yourself more. Obviously it's all about the relationship we have with ourselves, and then if you
mhm.
want to be in a relationship, great. If you don't, fine. Like, that's not the goal,
No,
because our culture makes it the goal, and again then we're just
yeah.
following a path that may not be ours. And
I see this being true for a lot of women. I've had friends that for that reason, stopped being friends with, because they had the idea they couldn't be by themselves. They had to be in a relationship. Even
Right.
when it was with a man they were not really interested in and that wasn't far from ideal, it was still in their mind better than being alone. They told me, I'm not as strong as you. I cannot be by myself. Well, as a child, I couldn't be by myself either. And as a teen, I couldn't be by myself. And even in my 20s, I had big difficulties being by myself. This is something I learned when I started my healing journey, because in the end, what you were also sharing, if you cannot love yourself, then how can you love somebody else? So you first need to learn how to love yourself, and that means taking really good care of yourself, setting your boundaries, saying no, practicing good self-care without feeling guilty, without making any kinds of excuses for it, and being happy by yourself, with yourself, and having a wonderful, fulfilling life that way already, because then you can attract someone who is just this beautiful addition to the happiness that's already within you, that you've already tapped into.
Right. Yeah, one of my teachers that I really adore says the relationship is the icing on the cake, not the cake
Yes,
itself.
yes,
And we
exactly.
totally learn the opposite, when we're in our
Yes,
teens and even younger, right? We're reading all these fairy tales over the
yeah,
years. We've read fairy
yes, with the
tales
prince on the
to
white
us.
horse and the
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. And we grow up thinking it's the cake, like got to
yeah,
make the cake. And if you don't make the cake, then something's wrong and something's terribly wrong. It's like,
yeah.
you
But you
know,
also get judged, right? When you have
yes.
reached a certain age. It started in my 30s. The people say, "Oh, but you should get going, right? You don't have that many years anymore for a husband and for children." And then when you reach your
Right.
40s, it's like, I think you missed your window. And I saw this TED talk with a woman whose response to that was, "I skipped my first divorce."
I love it.
Right? I
Yes,
love that one too. And I think,
I
well, that's
love
it,
it.
right? I never got stuck in a relationship that also didn't suit me, not just like the
Right.
job that didn't suit me, because my journey was different. And
Yeah.
that's why I didn't end up in a divorce.
Yeah, that's right. You saved yourself from that experience.
Yes.
Which honestly is, I'm smiling, but seriously, it's so painful to go through divorce, even though
Yes.
it was what I needed, what my being required to be in order to be my true self. It was
Mhm.
and remains the most painful thing I've experienced. And that's even to say that because I've experienced also so many losses, so many deaths. That was my journey, was like both of my parents died young. I had a partner
Mhm.
who died when I was in my early 40s. And despite all those losses, which were very, very significant in my life, I have to
Mhm.
say the divorce is probably the one that's the most like ongoing. Even though it was a great thing for me to do, I needed to do it.
Yes.
So
And
you didn't have to go through that, which is
no, yeah, and I also suffered lots and lots of losses, family members, friends, partners, other people that were very important in my life. So I recognize it. My journey was a lot of abuse.
mm,
And a lot of things that really crushed my soul. And it wasn't until I discovered human design, in my case, in the gene keys, but there are many modalities that can help people
right.
discover these things, that I also learned that it is part of what I am here to do. It is part of my journey. There
Mm,
are certain things that I needed to experience, that I needed to go through in order to be able to answer my calling.
mhm.
And it still doesn't make it okay, and it was still incredibly painful, just like yours. But I believe that these things happen for a reason, and while they are happening we don't see the reason, and we feel like if we had a conscious choice we would have skipped all of this. We would
Mhm.
not have chosen this. And that's why I had difficulty with people who said, yeah, but our soul chose all of this, right? Because I thought, well, I would definitely not have chosen this. But the key is in our soul chose this. So as
Yes.
a human, We
Yes.
did not choose these experiences. We did not choose the painful
Yes.
divorce or the abuse or the burnout or the trauma or whatever it is that happened in your life. As a human, we didn't choose this. And if we had a choice, we would have never, ever, ever
That's
chosen
right.
this. So let's be very clear about that. But when you start doing this spiritual work, you start learning that you have multiple lives and that there is reincarnation. And that means that there is a spirit that is either an old spirit, an old soul, or a young soul. And depending on where you are in your soul's journey, there are certain things that you need to learn. And in order to learn those things, you choose a human life that enables these experiences.
Yes, very well said.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I am 100% in alignment and agreement with that. And it's actually a part of in Heal Your Heart, the work that I do in the Heal Your Heart program. It has four different aspects to it. And one of them is exactly what you just said. It's a whole exploration because I
Mhm.
do 100% agree that our soul makes choices that have to do with our soul evolution.
Yes.
And I also think, in my case, let's say my mother came in to live a very short life, to contribute to the journey that my soul was desiring uh,
Mhm.
to transcend during this lifetime. And I'm sure, obviously, her soul also had whatever she required for herself for living a very short life. But
Yes.
it's very different to see it as a contribution. And yes, that took me a very long time. For anyone
Yes.
that's listening, I definitely, it took me probably about 45 years to get to that awareness.
Exactly. Same
She
here.
died when I was really young, but that's a whole different way of looking at and perceiving and
Mhm.
understanding um, our life
Exactly.
journeys. Yeah.
And I also see a big difference because I didn't grow up in a spiritual family. We were
Who
barely
did?
religious, which is a good thing, I think, because I don't believe in set religion, but that's a whole different discussion. But if you don't have anybody in your family or even in your friends circle or something that knows about the reincarnation, past lives, karma, soul contracts, the soul itself, then you take everything very personal because it's happening to you, and it
Sure.
is happening to you as the human part of the equation that makes up you. And you can only start healing these parts and growing into these parts when you start doing the work and when you start connecting with other people on a similar journey and when you start reading or educating yourself, which is why people like you and me are so important and why our programs are so important because they are designed to help people move through these stages to come out on the other side integrated fully into who they are with an open heart to live a wonderful life.
Yes, totally agree with that.
Right.
Yes,
Yes. And so
absolutely.
this connection to source and this becoming aware that there's a human part of you and a soul part of you and that
Yes.
you're merged in this life to go through this journey together. That's one part of healing your heart. But what are some of the other things that you see that are milestones maybe or requirements for healing your heart?
Yeah, I call them the four gates, but it's mainly because I'm a very visual person. And for me, the name of my business is Come Back to Love, and I see it as a path.
Hmm.
It's very visual for me that there's an actual path that we're on, and it's not necessarily linear, but our minds like to attach to linear. So,
Yes.
um, and as we walk down the path, there are like four gates that we need to approach, be with, and then the gate opens, and then we move to the next one. And again, that's not
Mhm.
necessarily linear, but again, the work can be
Yeah.
linear. So, yeah, the first place we look is the emotional. As a psychotherapist, I can say that the emotional is not the end all of healing. It is important to look at the emotional, but also not to attach to the emotional and make it so real and so solid that
Hmm.
it's all we identify with,
Yes.
like
Agreed.
so that's a big piece of the work is, going inside and what I call excavating the obstacles, like we talked about in the beginning of our conversation, the things that took over from the past that are still there. So that is an important piece. But then there's
Mm-hmm.
a whole other piece of work that really has us seeing that our thoughts, feelings, and emotions, 98% of them aren't actually ours. And
Mm-hmm.
so we touched upon this with, all the sort of programs that are running and prescriptions that are out there. And so there's a lot of tools that I've learned in the realm of access consciousness, which is a body of knowledge, a body of wisdom, body of practice, really practice tools to support us in actually detaching from these emotions that can get so stuck
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and keep us stuck, right? Like I could live my entire life as like the woman whose mother died when she was 10, like, and the sort
Yes.
of victim
Or
energy of that and the sadness of that and the grief of that and the whole
yeah.
thing. And that would be like an identity that I would be living my entire life with. But no,
Mm-hmm.
thank you to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, because that doesn't lead to amazing things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so there's the emotional. Then there's a lot of work on the mind. I found the work of neuroplasticity, which is
Yeah.
basically how to rewire the brain. During COVID, I think it was maybe the end of 2020, and I still hadn't fully recovered from the burnout. It had gotten much, 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 much better with the
Mm-hmm.
energy work I was doing, mostly based in tantra, so like spiritual and energetic work
Mm-hmm.
that helped me get better, but I wasn't fully better. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I mean when I say like the emotional it's not enough to do therapy work. It's a part of
No.
it, but it's not
No.
everything.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so the tools that I learned in terms of rewiring my brain helped me fully recover. And so I love them so much. I bring them into the program. We spend a whole lot of time on the mind and like what to do about those limited beliefs and thoughts and the ways that we think that keep us again stuck in that programming that might not be right for us fully.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
then the soul journey, and then like you just described already, and then of course the body, which we've
Yeah.
also talked about. So basically, befriending the body, loving the body, joining with the body, bringing the body together on our path rather than what I used to do, dragging it around and not
Mm-hmm.
really paying any attention to it, honestly.
No, I totally agree with you. One of the things that stand me apart from other people is that I combine the woo with the science. So on the one hand, I
Yeah,
am an
same.
energy healer. I've done a lot of different energy healing modalities, and I am a lot of different types of therapists because I use them to heal myself, and I follow the things that I'm interested in. But I indeed also studied a whole bunch of things in neuroscience, but on also epigenetics, where we
Mm,
studied the
yes,
effect on our beliefs, on our cells, on a
yes,
cellular level within the body. And many people think that they are a victim of their DNA or that they are a victim of genetics. And that is not true. You're a victim of your thoughts, of the mind. And if you are able to see that connection and to reprogram the mind with the help of neuroplasticity, then you can change yourself on a cellular level. And that
yes,
is what's happening for the people, for instance, who had a diagnosis of cancer and that they only had a month to live. And they said, no, I am not accepting this. And they started working on their beliefs and their convictions, and they sort of expelled it out of the body and then are called a miracle.
yes. Yeah, it's true. When I was 30, someone said, you will never get pregnant. Like, that's not possible. Your hormone levels are this, their hormone levels are that, and you're da 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 with all these diagnoses, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, really young and still, even though I wasn't as aware, not nearly as aware as I am now, and still I just had this strong spirit inside me. I was just said to them, nope, I will get pregnant. You'll see. And
Mm-hmm.
and I did. I worked with somebody who exactly worked on the mind, worked on some healing that I could handle at that time, some grief work, and my mind, and very short time, like maybe 2 months later, I was pregnant, and then I sent these like letters to the doctors and told them, you know what, so.
F you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was, yeah, and absolutely. And I have witnessed also what you said, like people with, pretty serious illnesses that heal. And yes, it's a miracle. And so I have a very dear friend who is so skilled at that with his own body. And the doctors are always like, um, wait, we should check this again.
Mhm. I think there's so much about the mind and the body, for that
Mhm.
matter, that is
Yeah.
still unknown. And we are discovering more and more things, but I think we're only scratching the surface. And
Yeah.
that's why these studies are very important, but also why a lot of people put too much emphasis on being proven by science, for instance.
Mm.
I'm an acupuncturist, is one of the things that I am. And
Oh,
a lot of people say that acupuncture doesn't work, even though it's a lot older than any form of Western medicine
yes.
is out there, because it cannot be proved by science. And that this leaves no room for the metaphysical. But they've also shown with experiments that they fired protons, I think, to a wall. And as long as there was a camera on it, they went in this direction. But as soon as there was nobody looking, they did all kinds of other things. And
Right.
they have no explanation for it, but they can reproduce it. So there are so many things that we still have no idea about. And we are still very much pioneering, even though we've already progressed a lot and we know a lot more than we did 20, 30, especially 40 years ago. We are
Yeah.
still very much at the beginning. And
Mhm.
that's a big reason why I am doing these talks and why we are talking about this, and behind my channel, because when I started out, there was nobody talking about these things, and
Wow.
there was no help to be found. And now I want to have this place where people can come and feel heard and feel seen and feel understood and know that they're not alone and that there is a way out or through, or however you want to call it, and inspire them to take action and take ownership of their life. And if that is you, if you are listening and if you're watching, and you feel resonance with what we are talking about, then both of us would love it if you would reach out and, started your journey.
Yeah, reach out and say hi.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
where can people find you, Robyn?
So my website is comebacktolove.com. Pretty easy to remember and find. And you can find me on social media with the same name, like on Instagram. Um, I do want to offer listeners a really wonderful class that I just did about a month ago. It was a live class called The Three Main Obstacles on Your Path to Love. And it really just it was really wonderful. It was really great class and really clearly identifies what the main obstacles are and why people might do what I call a trauma bypass, where
Mm-hmm.
they just kind of keep going, like we were talking about, sort of drag your body, but drag like you're being around. And
Mm-hmm.
when you bypass that, you just end up repeating the same patterns over and over again. And so the class very much helps people identify when they're doing that, what I'm calling trauma bypass, and then what to do about that so that they don't keep repeating these patterns over and over again and actually start to do the healing work. So I'm
Right.
really happy to send that out to anybody who wants to hear that class. And I know you'll have a link for people to be able to do that.
Exactly. So if you resonate with what Robyn shared and you think, well, I keep ending up in the same types of situations, or the same things keep happening over and over again to me, maybe the specific details are a little bit different, but the gist of it is more or less the same, then you are bypassing trauma, and then you need to watch Robyn's class. So I'll make sure indeed that the link to your class and also the links to find you will be included in the show notes. Um, are there any last tips or things you would like to say to someone who is on this healing journey?
Yes, what really is standing out for me so much, especially maybe because I have one of my children is in his mid 20s or sort of on the side of approaching 30-ish. And I'm just aware of the anxiety that that generation and people in their 30s also that I know
Mhm.
that are struggling with a lot of anxiety. And it occurs to me that even though that generation is more aware, certainly than I was when I was in my 20s and 30s, but that there's just I guess I'm putting out an invitation to pay attention to the body and to not do what you and I both did and end up in in, yeah, okay, it was the right place because that's where we ended up, but maybe also the wrong place. And that led to, a whole lot of discomfort and challenge at a
Mhm.
certain point. So I guess I'm just, also just sending out a wish that there's, more awareness in that regard, and that we take these communications from our bodies seriously, but also in a holistic way. I
Yes.
think there's a lot more, empathic beings and HSPs than people are even aware of. Even
Hmm.
though it's language that we all know now, I think there's a lot of people that don't recognize it in themselves. And I
For
wish I,
sure. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. 1 in 5 people identifies with this, even though they largely are not aware of it. So if you are someone who looks at everybody that you meet and you feel very different from almost everybody that you're meeting, then chances are very high that you are either an empath or a highly sensitive person. If you are in doubt, reach out. I will gladly talk
yeah,
with you and give clarification where you need it. And if you are not sure, if you know the signals of your body, if you know how to recognize it, or you are recognizing some signals but you have no clue what to do with it, then definitely also reach out, because it is important that you get to know yourself really well, that you get to know your signals really well, and that you know what to do when you identify them, so that you become, well, the manager of your life.
yeah, do the healing work and yes,
Yes,
come aligned with your true path. That's what it's really all about.
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been really loving our talk, Robyn. So I really want to thank you for this wonderful heart-to-heart conversation that we had. And I think we talked about some really awesome topics. I hope that we got to inspire lots and lots of people with our talk today.
Yes.
And I feel very blessed to be able to talk with you.
Thank you so much. I feel the same. It's always incredible to meet a soul sister. So thank you.
Yes. For
Yeah.
sure. And everybody that was listening and that was watching this episode, thank you also for staying with us until the end. If you haven't done so already, it would be amazing if you subscribed to the channel, maybe hit the notification bell so you never miss another video again. And if you felt that this was a really valuable talk, then it would mean the world to me if you could share it with your tribe, because you never know who you know that needs to hear this message that we shared here today. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your support. Leave us a comment with your biggest insight, and I will catch you again next week with another fabulous guest. Have an amazing rest of your day.